Well, thank you for being with us tonight. I want to thank Jay for teaching the last couple of weeks. I had a granddaughter that was in the volleyball tournament, state volleyball tournament. They made it to the semifinals, and it was a great ride. But I do thank Jay for filling in for the last couple of weeks. I appreciate that very much. We're going to continue our study with David. If you turn to 1 Samuel 21 and 22, we'll be getting there in a little bit. Last week, as Jay taught, David's pinnacle. I mean, if you're going to talk about success or everything you wanted in life, David had that list, right? He was young, handsome, athletic. You know, the world thinks a lot of athletes who are able to do great things on the football field or the baseball field or whatever athleticism they have. He was enriched by Saul. You know, he got wealth because he killed Goliath. That was part of the deal. He was anointed king by God. I mean, you know, that'd be like you're going to be president, right? You know, doesn't get any higher than that. He got to marry the king's daughter. He's best friends with the king's son, and his family is tax-free. But was this really David's pinnacle? Or is this what the world would consider a person's pinnacle? Because if you look at the list there are very few things on there that David actually pursued. You know, maybe the musician part. Is the musician part on there? He was a musician. You know, he probably had to maybe take some time to learn how to play the harp or the lyre, whatever musical instrument he was playing. But the rest, you know, was he after riches? No. When he killed Goliath, it was because Goliath was challenging God's armies. That was just part of the deal that Saul said, hey, whoever kills this guy gets these things, including marrying his daughter. And David didn't pursue these things. So is this David's actual pinnacle? This is, in my view, something the world would consider somebody's pinnacle. But David attained these things early on in his life. There we go. Alfred Tennyson said, and I don't even know who Alfred Tennyson is. He lived a long time ago. But he must have been an important guy, because I do remember this quote from him. It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. In other words, it's better to have experienced love with somebody than to never experience love. To experience that love and lose it. But I've also heard it said that it's better to not have had wealth than to experience it and then lose it. These people that win the lottery and they think, you know, I got $1 million, and then they don't know how to handle their money, and before they know it, it's gone, and they're at a lower state then than they were before they ever won the lottery, because they had this wealth, they had it made, and now they're back to ground zero or nothing. And it's very difficult to get through that. And so David had all these things, and he lost them, and it depended on where your heart is, and it depends on where our heart is when we go through trials in life. Was David in pursuit of the blessings that he had? No, he was not. What David was in pursuit was to trust in God and do God's will. And that's why his heart was one after God's own heart. Bad things happen to good people. You know, we've seen events in loved ones' lives or friends' lives where something tragic happens to them. You think, man, this is a good family, and they have to deal with this tragedy. Bad things happened to David. Saul was trying to kill David. And David really didn't do anything to provoke Saul into wanting to kill him. It wasn't like he was sleeping with his wife or trying to steal him blind or even try to get the kingdom from him. Because David didn't pursue that. And we see that as he was fleeing from Saul, he had many opportunities to kill Saul and then claim the kingdom. But that wasn't something that David pursued. And David did not let what we would consider a pinnacle, or the world consider a pinnacle, to become his idols. In other words, the things that he had, the riches, even eating with the king at the king's table and being in the palace. He did not worry about losing his kingship. But he didn't allow these things to become idols in his life. And if you look at Saul, Saul did. Saul was worried about losing his kingship. You know, God is the one that picked Saul to be a king. And also God picked David to be a king. And, you know, Samuel had told Saul that the kingdom's torn from you. But Saul would not let that go. That became an idol to him. He liked that power. He liked that, being a king. And David didn't look at something that wasn't something to pursue. It was something that God had given him and expected from him somewhere in the future. And David, as we go through the study, we see that he lets God call the shots, right? If God wants me to be king, somewhere along the line, I'll be king. I'm not going to be the one that's pursuing it. God said it's going to happen. I'll let him take care of that. In Philippians 3:18 and 19, make sure you keep your finger at 1 Samuel 21. Paul writes in 3:18 and 19, "For many walk of whom I often told you, and now tell you, even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things." David did not set his mind on earthly things. He set his mind on heavenly things. And we'll see that in a little while. When we end the lesson, we'll read some of the Psalms that he wrote during the time that he fled from Saul. And you could tell where his thought process was and where his heart was through the Psalms that he wrote. But he did not let earthly things become an idol to him. So here's where we're going with the lesson tonight. You must trust God in whatever situation that you find yourself in. Now, we've had a tough couple of years. The last couple of years have been kind of difficult for a lot of people. Families lost loved ones because of a disease. Families could not see each other because of a disease. There were a lot of difficult things. People lost jobs. People's businesses went under. And through all that, we as Christians must have the same attitude that David had. We trust God no matter what it is that we're going through. David didn't really understand why God was allowing this to happen to him in his life, why it's like the rug got pulled out from under his feet. But he did trust in God through all those situations. Every one of them. This is easy to say in Bible class and sometimes tough to apply when we're going through it, right? But we are spiritual beings, and we're just temporarily here. For our citizenship is in heaven, from which also we eagerly wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. I must have deleted a slide somewhere along there. But the similarities between David and Job, to me, are tremendous. You know, Job had a lot of what we would call earthly blessings, and they were taken away from him. And yet it says that Job trusted God through all of this, right? Even though he had somebody close to him says, you know what, just curse God and just die, get it over with, you know. But he trusted God through all that, and David is the same way. He lost all these things that we would call earthly blessings, but he just knew that his trust was in God, that we're just spiritual beings on this earth temporarily. A few weeks ago, I think it was on the 17th of October, and I can't even remember the group. It was Knox Blocks. That's what it is, Knox Blocks. And they donate trees to be planted in memory of a lost child. And my daughter was kind enough to submit our name because we lost our first child. You know, it's been 41 years ago. But so we go out to Hickory Hills, and they got an oak tree there waiting for us to plant for Joshua. And it was more emotional than I thought it would be. You know, when we first went, I'm thinking, well, okay, we're going to do this. We got real emotional, and part of that is because we're not the only couple out there. All these other families that we see, we realize that they have lost somebody close to them, that they've lost a child. If you want to go see this, it's out at Hickory Hills as you come into the entrance. They've got some crabapple trees. The first year they planted crabapple trees. The second year they planted maple trees, and then this year we got an oak tree. And I go, yes, an oak tree. If I had to pick a tree, that's what I'd want. It's going to be there a long time. And ours is right by the buffalo fence area. And I just bring this up because there are a lot of other families that went through what we experienced, and it's probably one of the toughest things in life that you'll experience. Ours was an infant, but there are people who lose children. They say that is the toughest thing to do, is to lose a child. And yet, through these type of things, we have to trust in God. Often people will blame God, but David never blamed God, even though he had no. It wasn't something that he did that Saul wanted to kill him for, you know. But he still trusted in God through all that. 1 Samuel 21, and then through 22:2. Okay, so the background of the story is Saul's trying to kill David, so David is fleeing, okay? Then David came to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech, came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has commissioned me with a matter, and has said to me, 'Let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you, and with which I have commissioned you. And I have directed the young men to a certain place.'" Excuse me. Now therefore, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you can be found. The priest answered David and said, "There is no ordinary bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread. If only the young men have kept themselves from women." David answered the priest and said to him, "Surely women have been kept from us, as previously, when I set out, and the vessels of the young men were holy. Though it was an ordinary journey, how much more then today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him consecrated bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, which was removed from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place when it was taken away. Now one of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds. David said to Ahimelech, "Now is there not a spear or a sword on hand? For I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's matter was urgent."
Then the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, behold, it is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you would take it for yourself, take it, for there is no other except it here." And David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." Then David arose and fled that day from Saul, and went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s?" David took these words to heart, and greatly feared Achish, king of Gath. So he disguised his sanity before them, and acted insanely in their hands, and scribbled on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva run down into his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, "Behold, you see the man behaving as a madman. Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this one to act the madman in my presence? Shall this one come into my house?" So David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with him. Excuse me. David wasn't really fully honest with the priest, was he? So he didn't tell him the full truth. Yeah. And so I want to bring this up because David wasn't a perfect man. He had his faults, and it cost Ahimelech his life. Saul ended up killing Ahimelech and 85 of his household members. And then they went where Ahimelech was from and killed a bunch of his family. And so it cost their lives. And that's in 22:18. If you want to jump ahead, that's where that's found. That's one of those things because David finds out about it. How do you live with that? How do you have that on your conscience the rest of your life? That because of what you said to Ahimelech, you were dishonest, that he lost his life. And yet David still trusted in God through all this. So the lesson for me, and the lesson I hope for you, is that we're gonna trip up, we're gonna fail. Sometimes we'll hurt brothers and sisters and people. And we have to move past that and continue to trust in God. We see David fled to Achish, king of Gath. Now, do you remember who was from Gath? I kind of helped us out here, right? Goliath was from Gath. The guy he just killed here a few chapters back. And they know who David is. And yet he runs to the enemy. Thanks, Keith. We're going to see what people would consider a low point in David's life. That he feels that he's safer with the enemy than with his own countrymen. And it didn't look like it was going to go well for him. So what does he do? He plays the part of an insane guy and scratches on the door and drools a little bit. And King says, "I don't need this guy around." And so then he flees to a cave. So here's David. He was eating with the king, the choice food. He got to sit with some important people. Married to the king's daughter who he had to leave, a best friend, the king's son. Now he's living in a cave. And remember, I started the study. It's harder to lose something once you've experienced it, and I indicated wealth. How difficult that would be for most people to go to this. I guess if we were bringing it to 2021, we get to go to the White House, and we're eating the president's food. He has his own chef, and they don't, sometimes they eat McDonald's, right?
But it would be like that. And you get to rub elbows with important people, and the country thinks you're a hero. Remember everybody in Judah and Israel just sang David's praises, and they're singing your praises because you're such a great leader of the United States of America, and you're in the White House. And next thing you know, you're in the desert down in Arizona somewhere, chewing on a cactus. Right? What a contrast. That's where David's at. He's in a cave. He's living in a cave. He's homeless. And yet he still trusted in God. And I hope, I keep repeating that, but that's something we have to hold on to. I mentioned about the tree that we planted for Joshua. I remember going through that event, and what got us through, Sandy and I, was our faith in God. Because I don't know how you deal with it any other way. We trusted Him. Lord, it's in your hands. Don't know why this happened. And so I'm pleading with you tonight that if you don't have trust in God, that you do develop that trust so that in any circumstances that you find yourself, it's going to be okay. Even to the point of death, it's going to be okay. We see that his family came to him. And as I was reading this, I'm thinking a couple different things. First of all, I'm thinking, man, when you're down and out, who can you count on? Family, right? Of anybody that you can count on, family typically, not in all cases, typically are the ones that'll be there for you. And that was the case in our case. We were down in Iowa City for 3 days. Had a mother-in-law and a brother-in-law helping us through that time. My mom was down there helping us through that. And so when I originally read that, I'm thinking, yeah, who's going to be there when you're down and out, the family? And that should be true, by the way. We need to take care of one another. God has required that of us. He's instructed us to do that. He's also instructed, I'm talking about biological family now because that was his biological family that came down to him. But we can apply that to our Christian family too. God has told us to take care of one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. But then I got to thinking, they're probably in danger. Saul if he killed Ahimelech and 85 of his family, it's not going to bother him to kill Jesse and the brothers of David, in my mind. I'm reading into that, but I'm thinking that's part of the reason they went down to him. Were they in danger? And then look who came to him. In verse 2 of 22. So, all right, I just want you to think of a worldly perspective here, okay? I just lost all this being with the President of the United States, eating with him, and now I'm in the Sahara Desert, and who comes to me? People who's got distress. People who don't have any money. They're in debt. People who are discontented. These are the people that came to David. In our mind, I would probably be wallowing in self-pity about everything that I'd lost, and then hear all these wonderful people that are coming there to uplift me, right? No, they're discontented, they're in debt, they're in distress. But we have to see God's hand in all this. Sometimes God has to bring us to our lowest point in life before we fully trust in Him, because oftentimes we trust in ourselves. Who makes the wealth? Well, I do. I got to work and they pay me. And so oftentimes God can only use us when we get to the lowest point in our life.
And David had become a captain over them. There were about 400 men with him. These are the ragtags. And yet David didn't say, why don't you just leave me? You're just a bunch of losers. You got your own problems. I don't need your problems. I want you to see the heart of God in this. Look at Jesus and who he went to. The people that were struggling with sin in their life, the people who were sick and had problems in their life. That's who he went to, right? I came to seek and save the lost. Can you see the heart of God in what David did here? And God working through this situation? 1 Samuel 22:3. And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. David was protecting his mom and dad. He was getting them out of Judah. And they had a connection with Moab, if you remember in Ruth. I think Ruth was his great-grandmother, who was a Moabitess. And so there's some connection there. He probably knew some people, right? Distant relatives. Hey, Bob, you don't know me, but I'm your fourth cousin. Do you think would you mind putting up with my mom and dad for a while? But he was trying to protect them. And you see what he says? Until I know what God will do with me or for me. Trusting in God the whole time. Even through all these things that happened to him. Take care of my mom and dad until I see what God's obviously got some plan for me here. And I got to wait to see what's going to happen here. Because he told me I was going to be king, and it doesn't look like it's happening the way I would have it planned. I'm paraphrasing, or I'm throwing some opinion in there of my own. David's circumstances were what we would call unsettling. But he was trusting in God no matter what the circumstances. And we happen to be privy to some of the Psalms that he wrote during this time of his life. And I'd like to read some of those. We won't read them all, but if you turn to Psalms 34, we'll start with that one, so that we can have some insight. We saw what happened to David. Well, let's get some insight of what his thought process was. Psalms 34. A psalm of David when he feigned madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear it and rejoice. O magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and delivered me from all my fears. They looked to him and were radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him, and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and rescues them. O taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want. The young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. Come, you children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Who is the man who desires life and loves length of days, that he may see good? Keep your tongue from evil, and your lips from speaking deceit. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears are open to their cry. The face of the Lord is against evildoers, to cut off the memory of them from the earth. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears, and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. He keeps all his bones, not one of them is broken. Evil shall slay the wicked, and those who hate the righteous will be condemned. The Lord redeems the soul the Lord redeems the soul of his servants, and none of those who take refuge in him will be condemned. Wow, what a thought process from somebody who just... Is that my mic, Roger? I'll just shut that off. I'll just stand up here at the podium. What a thought process for somebody who, quote, fell from his pinnacle, trusted in the Lord through all of that. Psalms 52. For the choir director, a maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul and said to him, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. Why do you boast in evil, O mighty man? The loving kindness of God endures all day long. Your tongue devises destruction like a sharp razor, a worker of deceit. You love evil more than good, falsehood more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch you up and tear you away from your tent and uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous will see and fear and will laugh at him, saying, Behold the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches and was strong in his evil desire. But as for me, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the loving kindness of God forever and ever. I will give you thanks forever because you have done it, and I will wait on your name, for it is good, in the presence of your godly ones. Guy's in a cave writing this type of stuff. He says, I'm like an olive tree in the house of God. He wasn't looking at the worldly situation that he was in, but past all that, in a spiritual way. He was looking at heavenly things and not earthly things. 56. For the choir director, according to Jonath Elam, Rehoiakim, Miktam of David, when the Philistines seized him in Gath. Be gracious to me, O God, for man has trampled upon me. Fighting all day long, he oppresses me. My foes have trampled upon me all day long. For they are many who fightly proud against me. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. I got to read that one again. When I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise, in God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can mere man do to me? All day long they distort my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They attack, they lurk, they watch my steps, as they have waited to take my life. Because of wickedness cast them forth, in anger put down the peoples, O God. You have taken account of my wanderings, put my tears in your bottle, and they not in your book. Then my enemies will turn back in the day when I call. This I know, that God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I have put my trust. I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me? Your vows are binding upon me, O God. I will render thank offerings to you. For you have delivered my soul from death, indeed my feet from stumbling, so that I may walk before God in the light of the living. And the rest are up there, 57, 59, 63, and 142, that were written about this time. But I think we got a flavor of what was on David's heart. That no matter what he was going to go through, he put his trust in God. And that his thought process were on spiritual and heavenly things. And when we talk about a man after God's own heart, that's what God's about. Spiritual things. Things that are bigger than even what we can imagine or see. And David knew that. You can tell that by what he was writing.
But he, over and over and over, he talks about putting his trust in God. And I would hope that we could do the same. Thank you for your time. Oh, are there any questions? I didn't take any. I preached tonight. I didn't even take one question. Are there any questions? Seeing none, I make a movement that we adjourn. Thank you guys for your attention. I appreciate it.